Hey everyone, and welcome back or welcome to the channel. It is the end of the year, and with it being the end of the year and the holiday season, I figured why not take some time out, relax a bit, reflect on an amazing 2024, and not do a review today. Recently I did a video on my 1 year of ownership with the Subaru WRX, but I have been neglecting the Volkswagen GTI not only on the channel, but also in my own life. The GTI was supposed to be my daily driver when I bought the WRX, and instead it's been sitting in my driveway, so I want to give it some love and to take it out on the road a bit. With it being the end of the year though, it's time to start focusing on 2025 and reflecting back on a great year, and more importantly, focusing on what is next, not only for this channel, but also for my life as well. Is it time to move on from things? Is it time to move on from cars that I own? Or is it time to move on from certain content that I do? Well, that is all things that I need to consider. But is it time to move on from my Volkswagen GTI? So I've owned my Volkswagen GTI for 5.5 years now, and in that time I've put on over 63,000 miles. In fact, it's still under factory warranty. So back in 2019, Volkswagen was still dealing with the fallout of Dieselgate, and they gave this GTI a 6-year, 72,000 mile warranty, which I still haven't voided yet. Now I know I was supposed to modify this car way back in 2019. I did put in a cold air intake, but that's basically it. This has been my daily driver up until about November of 2023. Now, I have grown quite a bit with this car. I mean, back in 2019, I was barely doing car reviews. I was mostly just filming car event videos, and the GTI was my way of getting into the car scene as a car owner.
1,000 miles on this car.
100,000?
No, under 100, under 1,000. Braking still.
But now heading into 2025, things are a bit different. The circumstances surrounding my life right now are very different than where I was in 2019. I was 26 years old, didn't have a lot of responsibilities, wasn't really focused on Boston Autoblog being a business. Everything now is so different since I am knocking on the door of 32. I'm getting old and I'm starting to think a little old here, but the GTI is supposed to be my daily driver, and it's just not giving me the sensibility and practicality that I'm looking for. Now, I have to say, I do want to apologize that this car is very filthy. I haven't washed it in quite a while, and that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to take it to the car wash, get it cleaned, and make it a bit more presentable for this video. I also ask that you overlook the brake dust on these wheels. We are not going to address that today, but this looks pretty bad. After all these years, this color still pops and looks amazing. That has been one of my pride and joys of ownership with this hatchback, is that I kept the paint looking good. Now, there's still some scratches. Of course, it has received some battle scars, but it still looks fantastic. Back in 2019, they only made 1,000 of these, 500 in manual, 500 in DSG. They did bring this color back for 2021, which really ticked me off at the time. But this color sold me back in 2019. The GTI was practical, was somewhat fuel efficient, and fun. And even to this day, it still checks off all those boxes. So let's get this car clean. Looks good being clean. It's been a long time since I've washed this car, but from 2019 to about 2023, I used to wash this car once a week, and now it's lucky if it gets cleaned once a month. All right, so now that the GTI is cleaned, we can try justifying keeping this car before I get into why I'm ready to move on. So I think the first reason why I keep it is the color. I mean, you have to keep that cornflower blue. It looks so good, and it is still very unique. Sometimes with bright colors, you get tired of them. They don't age very well. Also, with this being a Mark 7.5, it is aging like fine wine. I think it still looks better than the Mark 8. Sometimes, though, when a new generation comes out, the older generations just, they don't look that great anymore. I completely disagree. Even though we are a few years into the Mark 8, even that facelift for the Mark 8.5, just isn't as good as what we have here for the 2019 model. And then lastly is that warranty. It doesn't expire until June of 2025, so theoretically I could keep this car for another 6 months. After that, that's when I think is the latest I want to keep this car. I'd move on after that warranty expires. But in the meantime, if I do plan on keeping this car just a bit longer, there are a few things I need to address. Nothing major, but I will have to spend some money here to keep this car in tip-top shape. So one being is the fact I need to purchase a new set of Michelin Pilot 4S all-season tires. But two, and this is more important, is that I think that I need to address the brakes. Now, I did get some new brake pads in June of 2024. However, they're squeaking now, and I don't know what that is. I went to Volkswagen. I went to my Volkswagen dealer. They told me nothing is wrong. But what is rather disconcerting is the fact that the squeaking is happening sometimes when I'm not even on the brake pedal. So it might not even be related to the brakes at all, although it does happen when I am at the top of braking. So there's definitely an issue there. Volkswagen couldn't replicate the sound. As usual, that's the way these things go. But I do know some people who own some shops that I'm probably going to go visit at the end of the year or in early 2025 to get that fixed. Now, getting into the primary reason as to why I do want to move on from the GTI, it's all going to come down to the interior spacing, because this car just isn't going to work looking at where I'm at in my life. It's a bit more claustrophobic, it's a bit more cramped now that I'm not really the only person in this car all the time. So when I look at it from that perspective, I am ready to upsize to something a bit more sensible, a bit more practical, but also more roomy. I don't want to make it sound like with the GTI that it's old school and outdated, and I need to be that typical millennial where I have to have the freshest and newest thing. That is not it at all, because I am perfectly content with what I have in my driveway between the GTI and WRX. However, there are things that are changing now where both cars in their current roles in my driveway are not really making sense to me. They're not making sense to where I'm at in life, and they don't really make sense as being a daily driver or fun car. So both cars are actually not safe long term. But with the GTI though, what it is giving me superficially is more than enough. I don't need all the creature comforts. I don't need leatherette or leather seating materials. I don't need soft touch padding on the dashboard. I'm not someone who has been converted to buying something really nice and luxurious because I review those cars all the time. I don't need a full digital gauge cluster. All I need is Apple CarPlay. That's really all I need in life. So it gives me that. The GTI gives me all of that. But let's talk about the practicality. Now, in regards to the rear cargo area, you're looking at right around 18 cubic feet of room, which doesn't sound that bad for a small compact car like this. This is the reasons why you'd go with the hatchback over a compact sedan. But one thing I've noticed is that this rear cargo cover here, it's great to have for security purposes, so that way someone doesn't peek in and steal my camera gear. But when I am going on those road trips or just on those weekday tasks, this basically cuts my cargo area in half. So I can't utilize all 18 cubic feet of room, and that's becoming a bit of a problem. But it's also the second row that is starting to get to me, the longer I own this car, but also where the rolls are in my driveway, because the WRX does feel a bit more spacious than what I have here with the GTI. But neither car is perfect as a daily driver if you are not going to be the only person in the car. So with the GTI, I have 35.5 inches of legroom, which isn't the best in its segment. But I will say that I have been influenced by the vehicles I am featuring right now, whether it is the Subaru Forester or the BMW X3 M50 or the larger SUVs that I have featured on the channel. And when I take a look at what they're offering, not only in regards to the upholstery or the amenities, but it's also the interior spacing. The fact you can get 40 inches of legroom would go far much better than what I have here with the GTI. But also, I do have older passengers in the second row. I want to have them be able to charge up their phones. I don't have a USB-A or USB-C outlet back here, which is very inconvenient. And also, when I do go on those road trips with the family, the GTI is just not where it needs to be. Yes, it worked a few years ago, but it's not working now. Mechanically speaking, this car has been absolutely flawless. Reliability, perfect. Even performance, 228 horsepower, 258 pound-feet of torque, and the 7-speed DSG, great pairing. Now, I know some of my friends and a lot of enthusiasts are going to say, but you had this car for 5.5 years. You should have modified it, you should have tuned it, you should have had some fun with this hatchback. And I hear that, I get that. But I really didn't want to mess around with the reliability at all. Owning a Volvo S40 prior to buying a GTI that car was nothing but headaches. I mean, everything went wrong with that car. And at that time, I wasn't in the best financial situation to maintain it. I'm going to admit that. I'm going to admit that after all these years, that I just didn't have the financial means to keep up with the maintenance for a used car from Sweden. So I didn't want to deal with that for the GTI. And 5.5 years later, I have no regrets at all. I have driven tuned GTIs. My friend had a stage 2 GTI that was lowered, had some amazing handling, had an aftermarket steering wheel. I mean, the car was just fantastic. But when I start thinking about how much money he spent on that GTI, and I'm like, you know, spending like $10,000 on this car just makes absolutely no sense. So the GTI just became my daily and a fun car that I could take to car shows, and also a car that I could get to dealerships to film reviews. And it filled that role very well. This has been one of the greatest cars I've ever driven and owned. I think all in all, 5.5 years later, this might still be better than my Subaru WRX, even though the WRX does have a manual. Also, a lot of my friends and people I've met in the car community have told me that, Mike, you should have went with a manual. But for the GTI, absolutely not. The DSG is far and away better. I have driven a manual GTI. It was a 2015 two-door. Pretty cool. But Volkswagen, their manuals are so disconnected. I've driven a lot of manual cars the past year or so, and Volkswagen has let me down a lot with the GTI and GLI. It's not just the shifter, it's the clutch. Super light. There's no feedback at all. So I feel that by going with the GTI with the DSG, that is most certainly the way to go. And that's why I wouldn't buy a Mark 8 with a manual. Just makes no sense. Driving characteristics wise, love the German handling and steering input. I will say though that with this being a front wheel drive car, the rear end does lift a bit. And yes, I do wish I bought some rear sway bars. Yeah, that I do wish I bought, because I would like to have this car feel a bit more flat in the corners. That is my one takeaway with this car, at least stock, that I wish it handled better. That up front, perfect. The turn-in, fantastic. But the rear end just leaves a lot more to be desired. And with it being stock, I have taken it out on some winding back roads, and I just didn't have the confidence to go in those corners a bit quicker than I probably could and should have. And that's where the WRX kind of filled that role and filled that void for me, where with it being all-wheel drive and the stiffer handling and suspension, that's where the WRX has kind of taken the slot as being the daily driver. It's more fun to drive, obviously, with the 6-speed manual. As a daily driver, I think this car has no weaknesses at all. It's very much like a Grand Tourer when you do take this out on longer road trips. You don't feel fatigued, you don't feel tired. Yes, the sports unit suspension and the DSG might get to you after a while, more specifically the transmission, because it is very clunky. I didn't notice that until I stopped driving this car on a daily basis. But on those long road trips to Watkins Glen or Vermont, New Hampshire, it's been fun. It's been really fun and enjoyable. I will say though that compared to my WRX, the braking is so much better with the GTI than the WRX. And I would even say that compared to the TR and TS, those Brembos just don't do that car justice. Where the GTI, I think the brakes are probably a bit too strong for a small car like this, especially a car with only 228 horsepower. But for those of you who have followed my journey with the GTI, or just followed my journey on the channel, and you're thinking of going in the GTI direction, whether it's a low mileage Mark 7.5 or a Mark 8, I'd say go for it. These are great cars. They really are. I just can't go with a Mark 8. After owning a Mark 7.5, this to me is the best generation. It's almost my version of saying that this is maybe like a 993 or a 997 for a Porsche 911, and I just can't go in the 991 or 996 direction. I feel like that. Even though I'm not religiously into the Volkswagen GTI lore, I personally think this is the best generation that Volkswagen has ever made and will ever make in the history of the GTI nameplate, especially now where I think Volkswagen will be electrifying this car in the future, whether that is with a hybrid system or full EV. So in closing, what's the play here? What's the move? Where am I going after the GTI? Well, if I lived in another country outside of America, it would probably be the M3 Touring or an Audi S4 Avant, because the E63 wagon and the Audi RS6 Avant are way too expensive and out of budget. So most likely it will probably be a BMW X3 M40 or Audi SQ5, but I'm just throwing those two out there because I really don't know yet. I am in no rush to move on from the Volkswagen GTI at all, so I'm going to take my time. But it is something to consider and think about heading into 2025. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, share, and subscribe for more. And I'll see you guys next time.